was planning to start with introductions and actually going around the room, but I'm afraid that it will take us quite some time. And I'm assuming that there are a lot of graduate students here who are planning to do surveys for their studies. Is that assumption correct? So may I ask you overall, did you have any experience with Qualtrics prior to coming here? And if you did, could you please raise your hands? Okay, so it seems like many of you have some experience. And essentially, I was never trained in Qualtrics. It was just something that was assigned as a part of my job. So for those of you who never tried Qualtrics, I would say just go ahead. It will be easy. Essentially, everything is self-explanatory, and there are some things that you might need to work on, but then Qualtrics support is usually so user-friendly that you wouldn't really need some prior experience to deal with them. I'll point out a few things that I made mistakes on in my first survey, just to make sure, because it's kind of frustrating when you have respondents emailing you and saying, well, we cannot take the survey, what happened? And then you realize, oh, I didn't take into consideration that. So to avoid this kind of cases in the future. Other than that, I wanted also to mention that, well, I'm not an expert in Qualtrics. My area of specialization is survey methodology, so we will talk briefly about some survey things. But at the same time, as for technical expertise, yes, I had to deal with it, and I am going to talk about things that I had to deal with. But at the same time, there are some options that we haven't even purchased from Qualtrics. So I'm not the last instance, and perhaps if you have some very specific questions, the best strategy would be to call Qualtrics because they're really good at it. So Qualtrics support is always the best place to start. And then just thinking that there is some echo going on. Do I need to adjust? Okay. So these are the topics that we are going to cover today. And so first of all, we will look at different survey options and overall how to start to create the survey and what are different options and possibilities, how to make your survey look better, how to log in to maybe to actually start using Qualtrics. Then we will talk about survey overall. So we will talk about what kinds of formulation mistakes one should avoid. We will be very brief about that. But at the same time, we will talk about the most common question formulation mistakes. And we will talk about different levels of measurement and to make sure that you code your questions appropriately. Because, yes?
Could you speak up?
Even more? It seems like, okay. So essentially, we will talk also about how to code and recode the answers on your question so that you know that, for example, if the scale is from 1 to 5, your mean means that. Because otherwise, Qualtrics will assign some numbers. If you don't know what those numbers mean, then your mean in the end wouldn't make sense. So we will talk briefly about some question types in Qualtrics. There are more than 100 ways to ask questions in Qualtrics, and we would be brief. We will be brief. We'll just stop at some most common types. Then we will talk about panels and how to distribute surveys, and maybe because there are a lot of graduate students and you are planning most likely, well, maybe not, but in some cases you plan to ask our office, which I should have mentioned in the beginning. I'm from the Office of Institutional Research and Assessment, and sometimes we provide panel data or we send surveys on behalf of graduate students. In those cases, we would need IRB approval, as you most likely already know, and then we will just proceed from there. So we will talk about anonymous survey link and what are the main disadvantages, and we will talk about panels. Panels is an opportunity, but at the same time, will the IRB allow you to have that those student records? That's the question. Then we will talk about survey flow options. So we will talk about how to embed data in the survey, We will talk about the possibilities actually to have maybe some identifiers in the survey so that, for example, you send the survey and then the password will identify, for example, student's college or something along those lines. So we will talk about randomization, which is really important if your survey is long and you do not want survey non-response to be higher for certain items than for the others. We will talk about branching, skip logic, and display logic, and then we will briefly cover the survey reporting. So that's just the overall structure of what we are going to talk about. If you feel like something in particular needs to be covered, just let me know. I'll try my best. Again, I'm not an expert in Qualtrics. I'm just doing Qualtrics surveys, and that's the level of my expertise. So just let me know if something else needs to be covered. So this is about the survey options, and I was just thinking maybe before going there, I'll just very briefly mention about the survey flow, because the survey options are essentially, I just wanted to start with my first mistake I made when doing the survey. But at the same time, so with the survey flow, essentially, I'm sure if you're planning to do the survey, you already know that the shorter the better, because your response rate will go down the longer the survey is. So that's why randomization might be important, and maybe having some item level non-response embedded in your design would make sense. Other things, so one can start with questions that are less precise, easier as an introduction, and then go with more difficult questions in the middle, and then just end your survey with, again, less difficult questions. It would be better if your survey would have a good introduction that would explain actually what the purpose of the study is, how it will help, whether or not you have incentives, whether or not, so essentially whether or not the survey is anonymous or confidential. Well, most of surveys that we conduct are confidential, which means we will take this information, but we will not provide this information to someone else. But if you do anonymous surveys, what you need to do in the survey itself to make sure that it's 100% anonymous. So that's important, especially if you're going through IRB. So those are the things that we will look at. But before doing that, I'm going to go ahead and log into Qualtrics, and that's exactly the way you will be able to log in if you have an employee tab within Auburn University. So, which I'm not sure. So, I'm going to go under Employee tab, and I'm going to scroll down, and then I'm going to click on Qualtrics. And you know that I'm in AU Access, right? So that's, would anyone like me to log in from the beginning, from AU Access? No? Okay, sounds good. So here I am in Qualtrics, and I will try not to go into the surveys that I have in my account. I'm just going to go ahead and create a new survey. And I'm going to go through quick survey builder. And well, let's just do Qualtrics demonstration. So I'll go ahead. I'll go ahead and go to the survey options to start with, because that's where we were. So, and you can see that there are different options here, such as whether or not to allow to go back in the survey, and most of most of the time, all of these options can be left alone, and that's why I wouldn't even want to point those out. But at the same time, some of the survey options might be important, especially if you are sending the survey via individualized links. So notice here, and that's something I didn't notice to begin with, that's why I'm just really kind of concentrated on this one. Please note that the recipient cannot continue taking the survey once their data is recorded after 1 week. So we had administrative review surveys, I sent it, and then in about a little bit over a week, I started to receive emails saying, well, I tried to get back to my survey, and it says that the link expired. So, and that was quite discouraging because the survey was anonymous and we couldn't really go back to those links as easily. So the whole issue was not very pleasant. So that's why this is something that I would always advise. If you are using individualized links, go ahead, come in here and just make sure that you change this and put it on after 3 months when you know how long the survey will take, then you will know that this is something to consider. Other than that, on this page, I wanted to mention to you that even if you have a single link for all respondents, your survey is technically not anonymous because you can still have IP address of the computer. So if the IRB is peculiar about your survey being anonymous, then do not forget to put here anonymized response. We'll briefly talk about this again when we are talking about panels. But what this does is even if you send surveys via individualized links, as soon as respondent responses to that link is deactivated, but then the data associated with respondent cannot be retrieved. So you cannot know that this particular person provided these responses. And in the same way, if you click on this and you use only one link, then essentially you will not be able to see the IP address of the computer, which is, for example, for administrative review surveys that many of you might have received in the past. It's very important to make sure that respondents understand that there is no way anyone can identify them. Yes?
So does that mean that if you fail to check that box, it's no more anonymous?
It's not more anonymous. Yes, essentially, well, if you use, we will talk about the link. It's unlikely that you will be able to figure out IP addresses on your own. But still, if your IRB requires anonymous, then I would strongly recommend to do that, to make sure that your survey is anonymous. And if, for example, our office says that survey is anonymous, that means that is clicked. At the same time, again, most of our surveys, if you receive the survey, exit survey, or survey of graduate students, we are using confidential surveys. And the reason being, we do not want to ask you, for example, about the program you are in. But we just want to make sure that we know the program we are talking about and we can disaggregate survey results to provide actionable data to the programs and to departments. So that's the only reason we are doing this. We're just trying to identify all the units associated with these responses, or college, for example. So we are trying to disaggregate results if necessary.
Anonymous and all those. So I want to know, is it the system that links to tell the person that it is anonymous, or is it just the individual? For example, if an individual writes you and tells you it's anonymous and forgets to check that, it means that is no more a fact.
It's not here. So, well, but if you are sending the survey and you are saying that this is anonymous, then you have to click on that. It's essentially, you promise to your respondents that that's what's clicked. If you have some, so for example, we have surveys where we actually tell respondents that their information will be released to their advisors. Then the consent form should definitely provide this information. And this is beginning college survey of student engagement. Many of you might have taken it at Auburn. So essentially, we give the consent form where a respondent can tell what's about, so that this information might be provided to the advisor, how they responded on the survey. Otherwise, you have to either say that this is confidential between the student and respondent only, or that it's anonymous, and even researcher cannot identify who gave those responses. So that's these are the two options that I wanted to mention on this one, and then we will just go back to the presentation. And so the next one, I would like to briefly talk about look and feel. I'll try to. So I'm going to cancel this one. And then look and feel, you will have all kinds of possibilities here. So for example, by default, your survey will look this way, but at the same time, there are other ways. So for example, from our office, surveys usually look this way. So essentially, you have a banner on the top. You can choose this, or if you would like to embed your own image in the survey, then I would suggest something from Qualtrics, which for some reason here, okay, let me just Qualtrics. And then there are blank options, so that you actually can just play with it as much as you would like. So somewhere here, plain. And then you can add the image that you would like and make it as customized as you would like it to be. So of course you would like maybe to make some changes, and some of those changes would need to be made via JavaScript. But that JavaScript can be easily obtained from Qualtrics, and if you would like to have that JavaScript that I will mention right now, just email me and I'll be happy to send it to you. But in the same way, you can email Qualtrics support. So for example, I would like the next button to look like next. So I can just print it here. And the back button, I would like to say previous, maybe. And that's how my survey is going to look now. But at the same time, if you would like the last button to be different from the buttons that are before that, so you would like, for example, to have submit there, then you would need a JavaScript to do that. And then you would need to include one more question and include JavaScript in that question that would actually say, well, this time, please make my button submit as opposed to. So there are all kinds of possibilities within Qualtrics, and sometimes you do not even think about what you would like to do most. But at the same time, you can always ask Qualtrics, would it be possible to do something like that? So if you would like to have different kinds of buttons, then you just email them and ask, could you please give me JavaScript? And then they'll just send it to you. So at this time, I'm going to save this and we'll just follow. But this is just to make sure that you understand that your looks might be very different depending upon what you would like to have. Would you like it to have very customized? And of course, you can embed all kinds of pictures in your surveys and documents if you would like to. So all of this would be allowed in the text editor. So prior to us, well, this is very basic, and I'm sure that those of you who had any experience with survey design were on many occasions warned about these things. So the most important part is not the technology that you use. The most important part is how you formulate your questions and how you code your questions so that in the end it all actually makes sense. Because if your questions are not valid, not reliable, then there is no point really in collecting data. And I will not talk about validity and reliability here, but I just wanted to quickly mention some of the most common formulation mistakes. And the first such formulation mistake here is if your question is ambiguous or imprecise. And here I took one example. My friends often use campus recreation facilities. So the question is, who do I include in group of my friends? What often means? And which recreation facilities we are talking about? So a better way to put this question would be, I use aquatic center once a month, once a week, twice a week, or every day. Then essentially it would make much more sense, and you would know what kind of information you get out of it. So the next common formulation mistake is when you have two questions in one. And here is an example. The advisor I saw was friendly and helpful. What if the advisor was very friendly, but at the same time not very helpful? So essentially these are two questions, and they should be separated into two. Questions that presume a particular answer, and those questions are easy to spot because they start from something like, wouldn't you like? Or, doesn't our government spend too much money? So things like that. And questions where a respondent doesn't have needed information. So, and here is an example. Do you agree with the university's current residency requirement? Well, if a student doesn't know what the requirement is, it's really difficult to answer that question. And so if you would like to ask that question, you would first state exactly what that residency requirement is like, so that the student makes an informed decision on whether this is something that he or she likes or not. So, well, now I would like to talk briefly about question types, and these are the basic question types. Again, Qualtrics has more than 100 ways to answer questions. To ask questions, and I do not know if I know all of them, but we will cover the most frequent ones, the ones that are very helpful sometimes. Well, with open-ended questions, if your respondents are faculty, that might work. Because faculty sometimes spend time to respond to your questions and actually to provide answers. But at the same time, students most likely skip that question. And can you guess what is the most common response on additional comments from Auburn students is?
No. I was like, no comments.
Something Auburn related. War Eagle. So essentially, these are our additional comments. You get War Eagle. So that's kind of what you expect from students. So if you would like actual responses, then perhaps it makes sense to think about alternatives of answers, and then you might actually get some responses. And here the first disadvantage of open responses is large skip rates. The second disadvantage, has any of you ever tried to code open-ended questions when you get open-ended questions? So essentially it's tough, isn't it? Even if you spend a lot of time, you just realize, well, I'm not sure which category to put this particular answer in. It's time-consuming, and sometimes it's not as accurate as closed-ended question. Of course, there are a lot of advantages to that. So, for example, if you would like to change something in facilities or in teaching, then open-ended question might provide something that you didn't even think about. So some students who feel strongly about things, they might just essentially tell you, why don't you do such and such? So that's the advantage, but at the same time, again, War Eagle is very likely. The closed-ended questions, and again, most likely I'm just telling you things that you already know, but you have to consider what scale you use and to think about the data analysis before you even proceed with your survey. And obviously you cannot do much with nominal scales, which nominal scales are essentially, for example, whether responded is a male or female. Well, I would say I can still recode it to 0, 1 and then just add it in regression model. But at the same time, it's categorical variable. You cannot do much with a categorical variable. Or which college you belong to. This is, again, another example of nominal scale, which is a categorical scale. And at the stage of analysis, it will be really tough to deal with that scale. Interval scale, very rare. Maybe someone will give me an example of interval scale, the only one, where we have intervals that are, I skipped ordinal. Ordinal is the example, to what extent do you agree or disagree with the following statement, which is essentially completely disagree, neither agree or disagree, agree, strongly agree. So essentially something balanced, more balanced than what I just mentioned. But at the same time, you do not know whether the distance between strongly disagree and disagree is the same as the distance between disagree and neither agree nor disagree. So that's what ordinal means. It's ordered, but at the same time, you do not know about other properties of the scale. Interval scale, I'll just start with an example. It's very rare. It's temperature in Fahrenheit. On the one hand, the intervals are the same. These are degrees. But at the same time, you cannot say really that 62 degrees is twice as warm as 31 degree. And then you cannot say that 0 is the absence of this, of temperature. Or so essentially, this is a very rare example. And then ratio scale is essentially the scale you can do anything with. And it's the scale such as what is your weight, how old is your child, or how old are you, age, so things like that. So, and essentially measurement scale determines how much analysis you can do on this data, so it's kind of important to make sure that you use correct measurement scale. Well, here I just gave a few examples. For nominal, you would use, for example, mode, the most frequent response as data, and here I just decided to go with central tendency measures. For ordinal, one can use median or mode, and I will just skip what mode and median is, if it's okay. I'm sure you already know all of those things. And then for interval and ratio, you can use means, standard deviations. And here, does anyone know, just out of curiosity, what kind of measure of variation one can use for nominal scale? No? Well, it just has to do with, so if all respondents respond in exactly the same way, then there is 0 variation. If all respondents are completely distributed around, so then, and there was the coefficient of Jacquard that was doing that. So essentially, what I was trying to say here is that depending upon your scale, your analysis might be limited. But at the same time, frequently, we use ordinal variables as pseudo-metrical variables, and then we'll just go ahead and do it. And do the analysis that is usually strictly allowed only for those interval and ratio scales. Well, I wanted to make, before we go back to Qualtrics, I wanted to have a quick quiz asking you about the scales, if it's okay. So, religious preference, Buddhist, Muslim, Christian, Jewish, other, what is the scale? Nominal, very good. Political orientation? Nominal, very good. So, income?
Quantitative?
Yes, it's quantitative. It's essentially ratio scale. Years of work experience? It's ratio. It's number of children. Ratio. Oops, where did I go? Years in college. Great. And time of the day when respondent watches TV. Well, it can be also ratio, and this is something that I wanted to talk to you about. Well, if we say that it's it's kind of tough. On the one hand, yes, it's interval. On the other hand, would you calculate mean on this variable? Or median? For the central tendency, why? Could someone explain to me? Why wouldn't you calculate mean or median on this one? Well, if one respondent watches TV from midnight until 1 a.m. and another one is watching TV from 11 to midnight, then on average they will watch TV somewhere in the middle of the day. So one should be very careful, and sometimes mode is a better descriptor of central tendency. And so essentially this is just to remind everyone that just because we can say that this is maybe interval, is it interval for central tendency? Not exactly. Well, now let's just create a question in Qualtrics, and we will talk briefly about how to recode it and how to make sure that at your analysis stage it will make some sense. Oops, and here. Here it is. Okay, I'm going to create a new item, and then you will see that on the right you will have all kinds of possibilities. And here I'm going to go ahead and create the multiple choice choice question. So I'm going to go with our customer representative. And again, you will be able to change in Rich Context Editor the font you are using, the color of the text, so all of this is customizable. So here I would like to have 5 choices, and essentially, you can see that I can change from single answer to multiple answer to drop-down list. So. And multiple answer essentially would mean that my respondents would be able to click on more than one alternative. For this particular one, I do not see the point of that. So I'm going to, and again, drop-down list or multi-select box. Essentially, again, you can allow your respondents to select either one or several responses. And here I would like it to be horizontal so that it takes less space. And here the scale would be from strongly disagree. And you can see that Qualtrics is really nice about it. At the same time, if I add one choice, it's going to make my life a little bit more difficult. And here, for example, in this particular case, I would like to change it because I want to add I do not know, or no answer, or difficult to say. So then I would have to change all of this. I'll just assume that you know that I changed this to a balanced scale where from strongly disagree, well, maybe I should just to agree. Okay, so currently, how do you think Qualtrics will code this? It will code strongly disagree is 1, disagree is 2, neither is 3, agree is 4, strongly agree is 5, and difficult to say is 6, which is essentially might be a problem because if you want to calculate the average, then your average will be affected by difficult to say. So here is how you look over here next to the question. You can look up how actually Qualtrics coded your questions. You can go to record values, and when you click on record values, you can change things. But in this particular case, I would say that instead of putting difficult to say, into the category of neither, I would rather go ahead and here, exclude from analysis. So essentially, as a result, your responses for difficult to say wouldn't be calculated for your mean, and they will not be provided in your results. So essentially, this is something that is very straightforward, but at the same time, if you think about it to begin with, then it saves you a lot of time later. So, and that's why I wanted to spend some time on it. So the next topic I wanted to cover would be the panel. And first of all, I wanted to mention a few ways how you can distribute the survey. And well, if you look here, I can just go ahead and click from edit survey to maybe, I was thinking I didn't cover many questions here. Let me just cover some questions before we go there. Well, my favorite is matrix table. And this is the one where you can, let me just create a new item here so that we have something. This is, for example, if you have a block of questions, and we have a lot of those surveys that our office conducts, where we have, for example, to what extent you achieved those learning outcomes, and then the list of learning outcomes is on the left. And here is some sort of scale that can be easily adjusted. So that's this block questions. They just so you spend less time on those, and essentially they are very helpful on the survey, so that respondents just read the scale only once and then just know what means what, which is kind of helpful in this case. So another one, and speaking of open-ended questions, I sometimes sorry. We had questions such as, for example, your employment. It's very important to Auburn University that you get gainful employment after you graduate. So we send the survey to our graduating seniors, and we send surveys to our alumni, and we ask, did you find employment? And then we are asking them to categorize their responses. And with open-ended questions, it becomes really tough. So we add an option of having this stratification questions. So for example, and this is the question which is drilled down. And, okay, do I see it? Yes. So for example, here, I can click on to add answers, and then I was coming here, I created a file that would have, and I'll show you that file in a minute. Hopefully I'll see it here. Yes. So, and essentially I can name this. So one can see that this is management occupations, and then choice 2, and then choice 3, and we'll see in a minute how it will look. So after you choose the first category, the second category will be different depending upon your choice on the first category, and so on and so forth. And this way, you can actually go down the list relatively quickly, although the number of categories is quite big. So, and I'm going to, so there are overall 633 answers, but at the same time, the respondent will not see all of them because the next one will depend on the previous one. So in here, you can actually change like broad field, narrow field, and so on and so forth. So if we do the preview of this survey, you will see here that after I choose this, this should be populated. Yes, and it does. And this should be populated, and it does. So essentially, that's how this one works. And again, I'm covering the questions that I frequently use, so there are many other opportunities that might be not. So sometimes you also need to ask questions that would have, for example, importance of this item to you. And then in addition to that, to what extent you agree that this is helpful too, or at Auburn, for example. And in this case, you would have 2 questions in one matrix. I would be very careful with those ones. Those are a little bit kind of crowded, but at the same time, if you would like to use something like that, that's always available. So these are the most common questions that I usually use, and of course, text entry. And you can, for open-ended questions, you can have the big, like essay box or small box. It's completely up to you. So now that we spoke briefly about question types, I'm going to go to distribution. And we already talked about anonymity and how important it is. So when I go to distribute survey, first it will ask me whether it's okay to activate the survey, which I'm going to go ahead and activate it. I can also activate it when I am under My Surveys tab. So I could go there and just actually click on one button, and then it will be activated. So here you already have the link, and that's why it's so easy. So you can just copy this link and do whatever you want with this. Embed on your website or just send it out, and it will be one single link for everyone. There are advantages and disadvantages to this. First of all, the advantage is you can just put it on the website, and then you don't really need anything else. Disadvantage is there is no possibility for embedded data. There is no possibility to identify a respondent. And so essentially some of the features are very, very limiting, especially if you're doing the surveys that you're trying to base assessment on. Again, it says anonymous survey link, and it will say so, but at the same time, if you do not click anonymous on that survey option tab, which we were talking about earlier, then you will still be able to identify IP address. So you should be careful with that. Now I'm going to just email survey. I would rather email survey than just and have individual link for everyone, then just use this anonymous link. And to do this, I'll first go to panels, because I need to create a panel. And when I go to panels, I have here an option, which doesn't show very well, to create a new panel. I'm going to click on it, and again, for today's demonstration, I created the panel, and maybe I should just show how it looks. And just also I'll show you how the other one looks. This is just the simple file that I used for that drill down question. And you can see that for all of these management occupations, there are these 3, and then for the 3rd row. So you can actually see how it works, this drill down. And here is the panel. So essentially, I came up with some very generic names. Well, it's not good to say generic, but the ones that are common. And and I came up with some embedded data that we will use for our survey. So I'm going to go ahead and create this panel. Test Qualtrics. And then I'm going to go ahead and create this one. And then after I create this, I'm going to go ahead and scroll down. And this is a little confusing because I have too many panels created. But in your case, you will see this panel right away. And then my choice is to import from file, because adding manually is not really fun, and I'm not going to use another survey. So I'm going to click to continue. And then I'm going to select that file. And it was on the desktops. Cancel. Desktop. And here is my panel. And it immediately recognizes that there is first name, last name, and email, which is necessary for Qualtrics. for the panel. These are 3 fields that are absolutely needed. Sometimes you name those fields differently, and then it will ask you to provide you that information. Where is the first name, and where is the last name, and where is the name, the email. So I'm going to go ahead and import this file. And I called it test Qualtrics, so that I remember. Yes, it's much easier when you have fewer panels, then you don't need to remember much, and this is easier. So now that I have this panel, I would like to distribute this survey to this panel. I'm going to distribute survey, and then I'm going to email this survey. And so here, instead of just entering email addresses, I'm going to find that test Qualtrics. And here within the panel, I can either select entire panel, or just sample, or just one person within a panel. But this is something that, just for your information, that this is possible. Usually when I upload the panel, I just use the whole panel. And then send now. I'm not sure, maybe because sometimes you make mistake and you want to make sure that you can just, and you can actually schedule when the survey will go out. This is one way. And then when it's scheduled to be sent, I still think that you can actually unsend it. But my personal advice, try to send the survey as many times to yourself as possible so that you know what went wrong. So just do these tests, and then you will be confident at the point when you are just sending the survey. Please note that I can change the names here, and I can change the reply to email. Currently, Qualtrics at Auburn has such a license that you will be able to send from anyone, but the email that will appear in the box will be no reply email, and there is no way to change it. So essentially, that's a disadvantage to an extent, and there are options of Qualtrics where you can actually send email from anyone, and it will appear exactly like email coming from that person. At the same time, currently our OIT doesn't do that. So this is the disadvantage, but at the same time, if the email appears coming from you, for example, when the person clicks on reply to, it will go back to you. So if, for example, our office sends survey on your behalf, we will just make it appear coming from you. The other problem with this email distribution that is especially frustrating to our office, with Auburn Portal, when you send emails and you have incorrect email addresses, they will not come back anywhere. So you will not know that this is, whether it is non-response or whether it is actual bad address. You cannot separate those two, which for research studies, I understand it might be kind of frustrating. So here you put the subject, and here you have all kinds of possibilities how to make your survey, and I'll just put test. And well, I do not want to send anything. I do not think that I came up with email addresses that actually exist, but just to make sure. Or maybe I'll just change the panel to my email address, and I'll be confident. So here you can save the message and come up with a message that will actually explain the survey, and you can see that there is a link to the survey, and currently it's individualized link, which means that every respondent will have their own link. They will not be able to take the survey more than once, and so on and so forth. The other things that you can do here to make your email more personal would be just to indicate the respondent's name, or to come up with, so essentially from the panel you can take a recipient's first name, you can actually include recipient's college because it's a panel field, and so on and so forth. So essentially there are all kinds of possibilities on how to customize this. And then here under advanced options, and again, email expires in 60 days. If you want to change that, then just go ahead and change it to 90 days, or 60 days is pretty good, but at the same time. So, but here you can see several examples. So individual link is the most common, and it will be default option. So essentially every respondent would be able to use their own individual link. And if you do the survey options right, the responses will be actually saved. Then multiple completes per link is somewhat different. It just would allow the respondent to send their email to someone else to forward it, and then this link can be used many times. So, for example, we had a survey where we wanted to get as many responses as possible, but we had this initial contact. At the same time, we still wanted to send some reminders to those whose links were not used. So that's why we used multiple completes per link. And then anonymous link is where all identifying information will disappear as soon as the survey is taken. So this is how to distribute the survey. And then one more thing I wanted, I'll go ahead and send it. And instead of, I'll just do, I'm just kind of precautious not to send it to someone. Okay, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to send it, and then we will see what will happen. Okay, save. So now it's sending. And I just wanted to show you that after this has been sent, you can either download mailing history and see the link for each respondent. You can send reminder or thank you, and you can delete distribution, which I wouldn't recommend. So this is something that you can do after the survey was actually sent, which is kind of helpful, especially if you want to send reminders. As you know, reminders will add to your response rate dramatically. So this is survey distribution, and now I would like to spend some time on some other options. And I just wanted to ask, it seems like I'm talking and talking and talking. Any questions at this point? No?
So when you use the categorical scale, right?
Mm-hmm.
So do you do logistic regression with that?
Well, it depends. Well, if your dependent variable is categorical, then you can use, of course, multinomial regression. But if you go to those details, then essentially there are other issues associated with that. It just depends on your research question. If you would like, we could talk about something like that in the end. So it's possible, of course. All scales have, there is categorical data analysis, so you can do, of course.
I mean, do you do that for your reference to keep the records, to see how the model was? Like, do you perform regression on the results?
Sometimes, yes. It just depends on your study and other things, but this is very, very particular question. So if you would like to talk about this after session, that would be great. Mm-hmm.
I have a question in terms of, I would like to do an anonymous survey, but I would like to also have an opportunity for them to receive an incentive. So I've heard that you can, some systems you can have them, when they complete it, they can get an anonymous, like e-gift card through Walmart or Target.
Yes, but I haven't done this in the past. So essentially with anonymous, it's much tougher, of course, to do something like that. I'm sure it's possible, but that would be a question to Qualtrics.
Or Qualtrics, yeah.
Yes, sorry.
Can you download each individual person's responses to either SAS or SPSS?
Yes, to SPSS definitely, and you can actually download it in CVS format, and we will go into this in the end of the session. So we will look not only at downloading how to create the report in Qualtrics itself, and how to download the responses. Yes.
If you wanted to do an anonymous link, but you wanted to also do pre-post.
Your questions are tough. It's very difficult to do something like that. That's a problem. Perhaps. Well, that's a difficult one. So again, that's something I would need to think about. Yes, anonymous surveys are great, but at the same time, if you cannot identify respondent, it seems like you cannot do so many things that it's just tough. Let me just go back, and maybe if we have some specific questions, we could talk about this again a little later. Sorry that I couldn't respond about anonymous. Yes, it's just, I understand that you have very strict IRB requirements, and this limits the possibilities. When you do these things for assessment, it's a little bit easier to keep the survey confidential. But perhaps if you provide to IRB the information on how you will keep the data secure, well, I cannot say.
I appreciate it.
So, okay. So currently, I just quickly wanted to show you. So if we wanted to embed the information about respondents' college and program, I could do it by editing survey. Then I'm going to just go ahead and, oh, it didn't remember me. Yes, it did. So, okay, so I want to embed the data from the panel. So when the survey is sent, this data are actually there. To do that, I clicked on survey flow, and maybe I just should do it again because so when I click on survey flow, I have all kinds of possibilities here, and I can add a new element here. And one of the ways is embedded data. And with panel, it's really easy. So for example, here is my variable label college. I just could put college here, then add a new field, and then put the next one, which is department. And then just essentially, I'm done. I can save it, and then with response of that respondent, I will get not only questions from the survey, but also embedded data that came from. So essentially, one can maybe come up with some identifier if you would like, but it will not be anonymous anymore. So that's the question. Maybe the next wave will be with password that will be identified by the respondents. So essentially embed something in the survey and then use that embedded field to authenticate. Authenticator, maybe. We can talk about authenticator a little bit later. Okay, so I'm going to save this. So this is one of the elements that can be used. Then another element that can be used in the survey flow, and I'm just going to, but right now I will not be able to use it because I didn't create several blocks of surveys. So if I had blocks of surveys, I could use branch and randomizer so that only this block of survey is coming up, or so that this branch, this block appears only for these respondents. But I will show it at the question level, which will make it easier. So the only difference between what I will show in a minute and this kind of branch and randomizer is that here I'm operating with blocks, and if I go to the survey editor, I will be operating in terms of questions. And frankly, I usually do everything with questions because I forget to add blocks. So it makes kind of things easier to me. Okay, I'll just. So for example, here, if I want to add a randomizer, I can click here on this table question, and I can just essentially do randomization. And then I can do no randomization, or just have different statements appearing for every respondent in a different order. This way, your item non-response will not be dependent on the order of the survey questions. So essentially, that's a possibility. And then you can only present this many choices, and essentially presume in your survey design that you will have this many choices, this many statements displayed to respondent. You can also set up advanced randomization, where some might be randomly selected, some might appear to all respondents, and so on and so forth. So this is randomization, and then branching is. Oh, sorry, I'm going to the wrong place. So you can add display logic. So for example, you can only display this question if the other question in the survey is such and such. Or you can actually use skip logic and say, if the answer to this question was such and such, then I just want to go to the end of the survey or to whichever question is there. So essentially, this display logic and skip logic is the same as branching. But branching you do with blocks. And the display logic and skip logic you do at the level of question. And this is sometimes much easier because you know which question follows after each question. So that's the major idea. So, and then finally, and at the moment we will not have any respondents, but how do you get results out of Qualtrics? And so, no questions about this. Well, there are many other options, of course. I'm just covering the most common ones and the ones that I dealt with many times. So when I view results, and now I do not have any results, but here are respondents, and if my survey wasn't anonymous and if it was associated with individualized links, I'll actually see the names of students. And I can look into them, not that I ever do, but at the same, because all the data are used in the aggregate form, but at the same time, that's what we will see if the survey is not anonymous and if you used individualized link. You will also see responses in progress, and sometimes, and you can see that someone started the survey, but they never completed it. Sometimes it makes sense to delete this, because sometimes respondents have difficulty getting back, or sometimes there was a mistake in the entry. So for example, we have paper version of the survey, and when a student who is entering the data made a mistake, and we realize it after the data were entered, we just delete the response, go back, re-enter it. And then here under view reports, you will have this initial report with all the questions. Reason it doesn't show all the things. You can also, as you can see, download this report in 4 formats, which is Word, PowerPoint, Excel, PDF. Other than that, well, it doesn't have any questions listed. Let me see why. No. It's because I didn't enter anything. So you can filter your response. Let me just do this. Okay. I don't know what happened there, to tell the truth. Anyway, so you can see all the questions, and now I'm very frustrated that I didn't. Okay, I'll just go here and figure it out later. Yes, now everything is good. So essentially, under report options, I can, for example, rename my report, make my report public. I usually password protect it if I do this, so that several people can review your report results. I'm also looking at which table and which graphs make sense, and you can add graphs, add tables, so you can see that there are different types of tables. In some cases, if, for example, this case, in this case, I can actually add, so for example, I know that my mean is calculated incorrectly and I don't want it here, or it's a nominal scale and I don't want mean to be displayed, I'll just make sure that mean is not displayed. So things like that are possible. At the same time, so you can play with it, and it's pretty self-explanatory, so I wouldn't spend much time on showing this. Again, you can make report public, share your results if necessary, and do all kinds of things with it. You can download it in 4 different formats. Because you are mostly interested in research, I just am going to go ahead and come here. And again, everything is pretty self-explanatory. So you can easily download the file in SPSS format. And, well, the ones that I commonly use are SPSS and Excel format. And so essentially, well, I didn't bring with me the example, and I do not want to show actual example for obvious reasons. But when you just download it, you will have respondent ID, all information associated with your panel, if you have it, and actually your responses. So overall, this is a very, very nice feature, and it should be your data set should be good to go. So that's the major ideas, and please let me know if you have any more questions, and if you would like to stay after, I would be happy to talk to you about all the possibilities, but most likely if you have very specific questions, we would like to contact Qualtrics about that. Yes?
When the Qualtrics link is sent, can they take the survey on a smartphone? Is it smartphone and iPad accessible?
Yes, it should be. At the same time, I didn't go into details about it, but it should be. It should be. In fact, Qualtrics sometimes gives you a warning that this question is too long, or this matrix table is not good enough for certain devices. So it's really.
Could you just repeat the question for the recording?
So the question was whether it would be accessible on iPhone or other devices, and yes, the answer is yes. At the same time, if you have more specific questions, then maybe it's better to ask support to make sure. But if something cannot be displayed, then Qualtrics will tell you. They will provide you with warning. And I've seen those warnings, and sometimes I just leave everything as is, hoping that the survey will be answered using computer. Other questions? Well, thank you so much for all your patience. I was talking so much today. Thanks.